Okay, so welcome. Thank you for being here. We're going to talk a little bit about what EFT is, how EFT can be used. So what types of issues come up. My name is Kallista. I have been using EFT about more than 20 years, probably about 25 years now. I have used it for practically everything. As Gary Craig says, use it for everything. Try it on everything, right? And because of the way it handles the stress in the body, it interplays with a lot of things. My first question for you right now is to look at, why would you want to use the EFT? So what's causing you stress today? And as I was preparing the slides, I'm thinking, right now I've got a meeting coming up that's making me anxious. Feel free to put whatever in the chat as to what's stressing you, or piping in orally. What's causing you stress? What are things that are, kind of little concerns for you? So finances, yep, that's there. I've got that too. I know I've got a meeting coming up. Health issues. Yeah, I have a friend who's got health issues. So that's coming up for me also. I'm conscious of her as she goes through her treatment. What else? Yeah, family health issues. Mental health issues. Yeah, so that could be anxiety. That can be depression. Stresses. Then we got stress. And then we've got weight issues. I know my weight's been going up over this past winter. I got to get back into losing some weight. We've got business issues. What's this? Anxiety, phobias. And phobias can be all kinds of stuff, whether it's bugs and things or whatever it is, taxes. So I'm just going to say taxes, and in there I'm going to say government, because there's a lot of government issues when it comes to what is our leaders doing, politicians doing. So those are issues that are there. So, and I want you to think about some of these issues that you have that are concerning you. Yeah, here's another great topic coming up in the thread. Busyness. This is like, so that can be overwhelm, and that can be to-do lists, right? Things of that nature. So that's another great topic, a great way of saying it. And yeah, the government, politicians, there's always something there to address. So I want you to think about some of these issues as we go through the next hour or so, and to look at where can you expand this list, because you're going to be thinking, I'm going to introduce you to other things that other people have used EFT for and used tapping for, and we'll kind of go from there. But I just want you to be aware of that. If you have a notepad, you can certainly make a note of what your own personal issues are. And I'll talk about this more in the presentation, but sometimes we like to rate what our issues are. So on a 0 being it's not there at all, or 10 being extreme stress, extreme anxiety around it, we will, put that ratio up there. So, this meeting that came up, I got an email this morning about this meeting, and I'm like, oh, and I could feel this tension coming into my body as I was reading the email. Not at an 8, 9, 10 level, but I could feel the tension at like a 2 or a 3. It's like, oh, I'm not looking forward to this meeting, and I know I need to be there. So that was something. So for me, that's a 3, right? So my friend's health, it's not my health issues, it's her health issues. So it's more of a 2 concern. So it's not a big deal in my life, but it's there in the background, right? So you're welcome to put a little number beside yours as you take any notes that you want, so that you're aware of what's possible for you or what might be going on for you. Okay. So Physically, EFT has been used for a lot of physical issues. It's headaches, back pains, arthritis, flexibility. It's been used for emotional issues, um, anger, grief, all kinds of emotions. It's been used for mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and things, and of course, performance issues. And we'll get into some, we'll expand on some of these points. So EFT has a lot of applications. As Gary Craig said, try it on everything. So physically, it can be used for your eyes, ears, nose. If you're feeling stuffed up, congested when you've got a cold, people can use it for there. I know people have used it to help monitor their arthritis, to deal with some of the pain they've got with arthritis. I've helped clients with their blood pressure. I've had a client with plantar fasciitis, issues with her feet, and I know, so we're addressing a lot of these physical issues. So there's a lot of things that we can be dealing with to alleviate the symptoms using EFT because of that mind-body connection. Because what's going on physically is also happening mentally and emotionally. Emotionally, every emotion under the sun is there. So, and there's abandonment issues, anger issues, there's codependency, there's often layers to the emotions. So I remember there was one time I was upset with somebody because they weren't doing something I thought they should be doing. And, for me, it was like there was, a duty and an obligation that we should be there. And I realized that when I looked behind the anger, I was actually jealous because I didn't want to be there. And they chose not to be there. And I'm like, so yes, on one level there was anger, but behind the anger was jealousy because I was jealous that they had the gumption to not show up. And I didn't have that gumption myself. I hadn't thought through that process. So there's a lot to be aware of, like, what are we feeling emotionally? And a lot of us have had sort of the mind-body connection showing up where if we've got a test or a presentation, we'll get that knot in the stomach. And so we feel that knot showing up. So we have these physical sensations that are going on physically, even if we can't articulate what's going on for us emotionally. Even today, as I'm getting ready for this presentation, right, and I've got my slides and I've been working on them the last couple of days, and I've talked about EFT like 1,000 times over the last 25 years, and I'll get in with a tapping session with a client. I'll just start tapping, but I could feel my body getting anxious a little bit preparing for this presentation as I got up this morning going, okay, I'm now down to the last hour of presentation. So I could feel it in my body. There was this tension in my body, even if I couldn't articulate that what it was, anxiety and fear. Is this going to go okay? Right? It's public speaking. It's one of those common fears, right? So here we get into some of these performance issues, right? So here I am public speaking, right? So is my technology going to work? That's going to create some anxiety within me. Am I going to forget what I want to say? Because I've not prepared a script. So am I going to cover all the points? So there's anxiety issues for me coming up there on that performance thing, right? So are people going to relate to this? Are people going to accept my ideas, right? So those are some of the things behind my public speaking fear that's sort of surfacing for myself today. But there's other performance issues. There's times where I've had writer's blocks, any kind of sports, with my son skiing, right? He's 13 years old. He wants to go fast. So I'm scared, right? Because I want to chase him down the ski hill. So I'd be tapping on the chairlift on my way up to calm my anxiety so that I could follow through with the speed that he wanted to go on along the way. Right. So there's times where you sit there and going like, why would you, like, you're just skiing with your son on a weekend day? Like, why would you? But there's times where you're noticing your body responding and you want that opportunity to work through some of those emotions and things that are going on. And tapping you can do on your spot. You don't need to go see an acupuncturist and get the needles done. You can do it on your own. Okay. And we'll get into some of the specifics more. Okay. Just to kind of give you a round, because you may want to tap along the way. These are the traditional classic EFT points. There is a lot of points that are outside of these points, okay? But there's some basic points, and you can follow along with me if you want. So there's the top of the head. There's a spot, right from the eyebrow comes in. There's a spot at the side of the eye, under the eye. There's a little nose underneath the nose where your mustache would be. the indentation on the chin. There's a spot at the collarbone, kind of where a man would tie, the knot of his tie would be. There's an additional spot that's not here, but I tend to like it. It's sort of to the side, kind of where your bra strap might be. So I tend to use that spot. There's a spot under the arm that's also very common. And then there's another spot that's not on this picture, but it's sort of where the rib cage is, so at the bottom of the rib cage, underneath the wire of your bra, if you're wearing one, but at the bottom of the rib cage in that spot there. So those are some of the classic spots. So if you're ever watching a video online and you're seeing people, these are the spots that are most likely going to come up. And then you've got the fingertip spots. These I like. So it's not the nail, it's not the pad, it's the side. And you can use all of your fingertips for all of these spots. And the most common is our side of the hand, which is our setup phrase. Okay, so these are the spots here, and you're welcome to tap. I say to people, if you're in a meeting and you're anxious, just use those finger spots. You can tuck your hand underneath your desk and just tap away on your fingertips, and no one knows what you're doing. If I'm walking, sometimes I'm tapping as I'm walking, and I'll just tap and walk as I go, right? And that way I'm sort of, my mind's wandering, and no, it's, I've sat there on the subway in Toronto and I'm tapping at all of my finger points and the face points, and I don't care. I've stopped caring about what people say. When you're on the subway in Toronto, people do whatever kind of thing. So I've given up being worried about, what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking. So those are the classic points. I've got some books that I want to share with you for a minute, just to give you a sense of some of the other ranges and some of the history of some of these dynamics. So there's all kinds of books on here. There's oodles and oodles of books out there. Okay, some of them you're going to find them at your library. And you don't necessarily have to be in a big center to do that. But there's books on freedom. There's books specifically on your eyesight, or specifically on. I remember reading Roger Callahan's one on public speaking. There's books that cater towards children. Right, there's Nick Ortner's made this one famous. So there's books for the tapping solution there. And there also there's this book called Acupressure. So this gets into a lot of other points, and this book is specifically around emotional issues. So you can address emotional issues. And the very, very first time I learned about acupressure, my father had his own company, and I was working with one of the women there, and I don't know, I was 12, 13 years old, something. And we talked about having headaches or something. And she said to me, if you go to the back of your neck and rub the acupressure points there, that will take care of the headache. That was my first introduction to acupressure. I had no idea that 20 years later, I would then be learning it as a modality. But there are books like that that has all kinds of points. And this book is designed so that each chapter addresses a different type of emotional issues. So there's things like that are out there. Now, it's not called EFT, it's not called tapping, it's called acupressure. So if you are looking for a book, sometimes you want to be creative with what it's called. This is another book I've called. It's called Encyclopedia of Healing Points. And so it's addressing things more from a massage perspective, but again, it's got points in the book. This spot here around the knee here, that's good for longevity. So there's all kinds of points that you can be using to address physical issues and alleviate stuff. Some of you might be familiar with Donna Eden. Lauren Walker has worked with her in her energy work, and she's got a book that incorporates the yoga, the points and yoga together. So you can do tapping while you're doing yoga. So for example, and I've done that with some people because I'm also a trained yoga instructor. So if I'm doing some yoga, I'll squat down into a squat position, and then we'll take a minute to do some holding on some of the points in our hands, right? Or as we are, there's some points that at our thighs or their shins, our lower back. So as we're doing our yoga poses, we might bring our hand around and then rub the spot at the back of the lower back, the base of your spine, to stimulate those points. Okay. So those are some dynamics that are there that's possible. Any questions before we get too far along? I'll give it a moment. And then again, you're welcome to pipe up. Just unmute as you choose or in the chat box. Marianne.
You know what? I know a little bit about tapping and I do some of it. And however, when I like lay down, I touch the right eyeball. And the minute I touch it, I just release all this energy. So
Yeah.
I just wondered what that had to do with tapping.
Um, they're acupressure points throughout the body. Roger Callan had the start, and I'll give a little bit on his history in a moment. Any point you use that you can find can help to release. And you don't have to necessarily rub, like traditional tapping is your tapping, but you can hold and press. You can pulse, right? If you're trying to relax at nighttime, you may not want to be as active, but there's also ways where you can just sort of imagine yourself tapping without actually having to press. So if you found that right acupressure point, then that's the one that's going to work for you, right? Um, yeah, Kate, I can do the points in there, or what I'll do is I will add them to my website after the fact. Some of and make sure that they're available on the web page. So you can find those books and kind of get an idea where to go. We all have our favorite tapping points, and this is why I'll say to people, like, find your favorite spot, whatever that favorite spot is, because that might be the meridian channel where you hold your energy. That might be the meridian channel where you have the blockage. There are 12 different meridian channels in the body if you look into traditional classic acupuncture. And Roger Callahan, in his traditional classic EFT points, he doesn't cover all 12 points. So depending upon the nature of your history or your trauma, you might be stuck. Some of that trauma and that energy might be stuck in different channels. And then, so how you hold trauma, how you hold stress, how you incorporate stress might show up in different ways. Okay. Any other questions before we move along? Okay. Let me get back to my sharing the slide. Okay. So here are the points explained again into different pictures. These I think are on my website. One of the things we talk about is the subjective units of distress. And I've mentioned this before, kind of on that 0 to 10 scale, right? So 0 is no pain, 10 is more intense pain. And sometimes we want to be aware of how heavy we're feeling, because we can say, well, I'm still feeling angry, but you don't realize that. I've had it where I've been working with somebody physically, and I'll say, okay, what's your range of flexibility? And let's say they bend forward and their hands go down to their knees, and that's where the pain starts. So they're bending forward, their hand is reaching their knees, and the pain starts. And then we'll tap through some of the pain. I'll say, okay, what's the range of motion now? And then they reach forward, and now they've got the tips of their fingers down where their shins are, where their ankles are. And they're like, the pain's still at 8, but the range of movement has improved because of the tapping has released that tension that the body's been holding. So sometimes if you are using the SUD scale to track your progress, and notice if you're doing things, if you're looking at range of motion or anything of that nature, you want to be aware of, is there something else that could be impacting things that might not be changing the stress? The other thing we talk about is chasing the pain. So for example, I was working with somebody and she was, carrying some heavy chains kind of throughout her shoulder on the weekend, and carrying some heavy stuff. And so the pain was a 7. So we were tapping on the pain in her shoulder, right? That was a 7. And then she noticed that it was still a 7, but the pain was less in the shoulder, but more in her muscles of her forearm. So then we're tapping on that pain. And then we're so sometimes it's kind of like the pain is moving around the body because there's more than one spot where the pain is lodged in the body, particularly with physical issues. So sometimes we want to be aware of, is that shifting? Or emotionally, I was working with someone yesterday. She had some overwhelmed issues coming up, lots of stuff going on. She's got physical health issues. Her husband's got physical health issues. He had surgery for the 4th time last week. So we've got this physical stuff going on. But as she dealt with the overwhelm, that was a 7, that dropped, but the anger was still a 7. So she can have more than one emotion kind of colliding at the 7 level. So we might be dropping the one emotion, but the overall intensity may still be there. So it's not until we hit the 2nd or the 3rd or the 4th dynamic before we get to that calmer state. So these are things to be aware of as you work on your tapping. Okay. This is a stress scale that was handed in my psychology textbooks back when I was doing my psychology degree way back when. So these are various life events that we go through, and they put it on a stress score. Okay, so if like obviously we've got our financial issues and stuff. If we're sitting there going, oh, gee, I'm getting paid next week, but there's no money in my bank account today, that, but the money's going to be there. It just means you're going to have a bit of a surcharge late fee because, you're paying your hydro bill late or something. That might be some stress, but it's a minor stress in comparison to, I've just lost my job. The bank's going to foreclose on me, or the landlord's going to kick me out because I haven't paid my rent for 2 months or something. That's going to be a higher stress level, even though it's both financially related. So there's things to be aware of, that how life shows up is going to impact us differently. We talk about, we're going to talk about childhood stress. These are adult stresses that we tend to get into. In the world of trauma therapy, we're talking about big T traumas or little t traumas. And sometimes the little t traumas, it might be minor. Like last night, I was working on this slide and I could hear somebody yelling outside the house. It's like 10:30, 11:30 at night. I'm like, who's yelling? I'm like, we kind of want to look out the window when it's dark outside. I can't see anybody. It's a stress. It's small, it's minor, it's not a big deal. But if I have that every day in my neighborhood, it's going to irritate me. It's going to add up. And those little stresses do add up. And if you go back to these little things, and you kind of work your way to the bottom of this list here, some of these things, they might feel minor, but if you have 10 things at this list, it's big. It's as impactful and as big as losing your spouse. So these are things to be aware of. Like, don't discount the little stresses because, oh, it's minor. It's, because it does add up. So whatever we do for self-care, we want to take that into consideration, whether it's making sure we get a massage, having a hot shower or a bath, calling a friend to get some of that comfort and get some of that emotional venting. These little stresses add up. And these are things we need to be aware of when we're dealing with our stresses in life. Right. So, and for those of you that have a science of mind background, you're aware of how the mind creates certain situations, right? But I had some women over a couple of weeks back, and one of them was talking about how her house had been broken into, right? Now, and she was saying how now everybody on the street is making sure they've all got security cameras active and working and stuff, right? So now the entire street is stressed out. It didn't happen to them, but that stress has been rippled onto the neighborhood, right? But in talking to her, this was her 6th time in life that someone's broken into her house. I've never had that ever happen to me in my life. But I've had a couple people, I had somebody go into my garage once. I left the garage door open and someone went into the garage and grabbed a cheap bike. And I think they came back another day and grabbed a chainsaw when I forgot to close the garage door. But those, that was petty thefts, right? So it's like, what are we aware of? And what's going in our mind? What is playing out in our mind? You know, these background things that we want to be aware of, and how does this show up? Uh, okay. As Gary Craig said, the cause of all negative emotion is a disruption in the body's energy system. For those of you that have had physical pain, whether it's a broken leg in the past, a sprained ankle, I've had a sprained ankle, right? Those of us women who have given childbirth, we know there's physical pain. If I ask you to remember that physical pain today, you can remember that it was painful, but you can't bring that pain back into active awareness in your body. If there's some residue pain like arthritis, you're still feeling it. If you have a bruise from last week and you press that sore spot on your bruise, it's still going to be tender and sore because it's not finished healing. So if it hasn't finished healing, it will still have some physical pain around it. But I don't remember the pain that I had from my sprained ankle. I remember the fact that I was walking very, very slowly the first couple of days, right? And the street light would be, red before I got halfway across the street, right? I remember some of that. I remember it as a cognitive thing, like a story in a book, but I can't remember it physically. Emotional energy is different. If I ask you to think about a broken heart that you had in the past, if I ask you to think about a betrayal, whether it was a friend who betrayed you or a colleague who betrayed you, maybe your colleague threw you under the bus or something. If I ask you to remember some emotional heartache, the emotional memory can be there. The fear can be there. It can come back. It gets stored in the emotional body. And it's stored in the body until we can get it released. Okay. Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about if it's still there 18 months later, there's some trauma associated with that, some definite trauma, right? Obviously, if, somebody, I'm driving in traffic, somebody cuts me off and I'm angry in the moment, right? That's a natural response in the moment, right? And I'm like scared. Oh my gosh, could get hit. That's a natural response. But if I'm holding that a month later, it's an overreaction and there's something off in my energy system. And this is something we want to address with EFT and with the tapping, right? Because we can clear these emotional dynamics. Talking therapy is wonderful, but it processes emotions on an intellectual level. So you want some kind of somatic or physical process to help relieve stuff that's stored in the body. Any questions? So we've all heard of the trauma responses. Okay. We've got the fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Originally, we had fight or flight. When this was originally studied, they were studying men at university because most men were at university, and it's easy for us academic people to go to the university and get our students to participate in our studies. So they were looking at the fight or flight model because that was sort of the instant response, right? They didn't want, women were too fragile to have in studies. Women were not around, so a lot of studies were skewed, so to speak. Now we're more aware of freezing, we're more aware of fawning. Women will also huddle when they're stressed. So if I get stressed, I might call up a girlfriend and say blah 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 blah, right? So women will huddle, will come together, right, as a way of dealing with our stress. So know that this mode, as much as we've got the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, know that this is a work in progress. It's not necessarily the end all and be all of defining trauma or defining the stress response. I saw something the other day, which is flop, which is, you could say is a variation of freezing. But this is how we respond. And what often happens in life is that we might be 30, 40, 50, 60 years old physically in our bodies, but our emotional reaction can still be 6 or 7 or 8, 9 years old. So what happens is we are responding based on how we've been taught to respond or based on what's stuck in our system. So, for example, yesterday when I was working with this client who was having some issues based on current health issues, so we started talking about her current health issues. We started to talk about how she's frustrated because you've got the medical model, but she doesn't get all the answers there, but she knows that it has a role and a place, but she can't get all the answers either from tapping or from massage or some of the alternative practices there, right? So it's like, how do we get the real answer? So she's frustrated, but and her husband just had this surgery. I know this fifth surgery to resolve one of his issues, right? So there's this conflict and this frustration, but some of this hopelessness goes back to when she was a child and her parents had health issues. So there's this overwhelmed dynamic of feeling inadequate, feeling like she's in the dark, feeling like there's some uncertainty here. So this is the trauma response coming back to play here, right? And then when you, depending upon how you deal with stress or who you're dealing with, you might shut down in different ways. Some people will come back strong and they're going to bully and they're going to dominate because that's how they deal with stress. Other people will freeze or fawn. We can also do all of these things depending upon what the trigger is. So some days we might just walk away and freeze because we're in shock, we're overwhelmed, or we're numb. Other times, depending upon what and how we're being triggered, we might go into a fight mode or something else, depending upon who or what the situation is involved with. Any questions? So, because conflict is normal in life, we end up with this inappropriate response to conflict, which comes from stored trauma. So we're not necessarily recognizing the real issues. We're not necessarily responding to the person. We're in fear mode. We're pulling back. Like, oh my gosh, I got to meet with so-and-so. Like, oh, my boss wants to talk to me. Right. So there's this anxiety that can get triggered. Right. So these are all things that we want to address or that can be addressed over there whether we're doing long journaling sessions or tapping, however we want to address the trauma or things that are useful. Okay. Ideally, we want to be able to compromise in our relationships, to negotiate with things. But in order to be able to meet in the middle, we have to have that maturity and the calm state of mind to be able to do that. And if we're triggered with our fight, flight, freeze response, I can't sit there and have an honest, open conversation to say, how do we resolve this? So this is where we want to clear those dynamics. Okay. Same with collaborating, right? If I'm defensive, it's like, oh, and my ego, I can't have an honest conversation to work things through. The more we can clear our emotional issues, the more we can have healthy dynamics in our relationships. One of the things I saw recently, it talked about the difference between a kind lie and an unkind truth. Sometimes if we want to appease somebody, we'll give them a kind lie, but it's actually dysfunctional. It's as opposed to if we give them the unkind truth, we're putting the truth on the table, which actually is a healthy component, even if it's not necessarily the truth that they want to hear. Right. So as we clear all of our emotional triggers, it's easier for us to have healthier relationships because it's easier for us to be honest and open and to receive someone else's honesty and openness. So one of the things we want to look at in our relationships is how do we work towards having flexibility in our relationships instead of being scripted in our roles and rules, having openness, honesty, right? Being able to have a little bit of sense of humor and play. And if we're stuck in that trauma response, freeze fight, we don't have any levity. So those are things we want to work towards and things we want to be aware of. Okay. One of the things too is like trauma can or tapping can address addiction. So when we have trauma, we're more vulnerable to addictions, and we want to clear things. So even something, if you've got a craving for chocolate, you can do some craving, some tapping on that chocolate craving, whatever that craving is. Um, Brad Yates, one of my friends, and we met at a Gary Craig conference 20 years ago. When he first tapped on chocolate, he didn't touch chocolate for 2 years. That craving, that urge to have chocolate completely disappeared. I know there's times where like I'll have one, but I don't have that urge to, gouge myself. So we want to be aware of where the addictions that we have in our life. Okay. We want to work through those things. Oh, here I've got a little duplication. We have to penetrate, and the other thing to be aware of in our emotions, we want to penetrate beneath the surface layer of the emotions. And I mentioned this earlier, the jealousy behind the anger, so that we can uncover the deeper layer, because it is these deeper emotions that are unresolved that act as attachments or addictions to what's going on for us. So it's having that awareness. Okay. And addictions can show up, gambling, work, people are addicted to money and they will hoard money, right? So anything we're attached to, retail therapy is a, addiction, right? So there's things that we get addicted to. And if you're taking notes, you may want to think of, what are my addictions? What is it that I'm craving that I can't not? I know for me, if I open up a package of rice cakes, the entire package is gone half an hour later. I can't have just one row. It's like all 4 rows disappear, right? And I'm like, okay, there's something there, right? There. So it's like, now that might not be a threatening or a big issue, but we have these awarenesses, and we want to be aware of what is that addiction that is triggering us. Okay. We talked about adult trauma issues, stress issues. I'm going to talk a little bit about adverse childhood experiences. And I mentioned the client who had this residue, overwhelm, and sense of hopelessness, uncertainty, loss of control, because as a child, she didn't know how to handle her parents' health issues. And now that's playing out 50 years later as she's going through health issues for herself and her husband. But we get stuff stuck in our past. So the adverse childhood experiences study has looked at different ways we get stressed, and different things that happen in our past. So take a moment for yourself and add up how many you might have. Was there any physical abuse in your family? This can include things like tickling. If your brothers tickled and tickled and tickled you, as in my case, that counts as physical abuse. And I still have a trauma response in my body because of that tickling when I was a child, because I didn't have control over my body, and my words could not get them to stop. And when I went to my mom and I said, Mom, they're tickling me. Well, they're not bothering you now. And something in my body snapped so that I was no longer ticklish. And that was the only way I could get my brothers to stop me from tickling me. Now, they tickled me several times. My body still has this numb reaction. My son tried numerous times to tickle me. No luck. So my body was still holding onto the trauma in to this day. If I hear the word tickling and kind of comes at me at a surprise, I can go into a PTSD alarm response. So some of these, I don't love this questionnaire because it doesn't necessarily address things. It talks about addictions such as alcoholism, but not workaholism. If you have an absent father because they were working 80 hours a week, that's still an addiction that's impacting the household. So emotional abuse, emotional neglect, witnessing domestic violence, even if you weren't being hit, you felt vulnerable and scared as a child. So take a moment and write down for yourself what your score might be. Okay. 33% of the population has a score of 0. So if you have a score of 0, be grateful. And it works your way up. So we have 2/3 of the population have at least some childhood event. More than 1/3 have experienced 2 to 4 ACE categories. You want to be aware of this for yourself as well as people around you. Because although you might be working on your issues, other people are not working on their issues. So they're being triggered based on what's going on in their life. And the ACE score talks about some of these larger stresses. It doesn't necessarily talk about some of those smaller stresses in life that are there, right? But emotional abuse includes constant belittling. If you had an adult tell you you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you shouldn't have been born, you shouldn't have been born, that's emotional abuse, that belittlement. So it is prevalent, more prevalent than we want to admit, right? And these stresses, the higher the ACE score, it predicts health issues, short life expectancy, increased addictions, job problems, physical inactivity, right? So you get into weight issues and other health issues because of inactivity, mental health issues, right? There's all these issues that come from a high ACE score. These are traumas that are stuck in the body unless you've done some active work to release them. So I'm putting this out there to kind of make you aware of, and EFT may or may not be your modality for resolving issues. There could be other issues out there that in other modalities, other ways you want to do stuff. Some people like the yoga. Some people, if you want to take a baseball bat to a stack of cardboard boxes to get some of that anger out, go for it. I've done it multiple times, right? I remember 30 years ago during a breakup, I was pissed off with my then, boyfriend, and I went to the fridge and I got the eggs that were there, and I pulled that old sheet of plywood out of the garage and I started whipping eggs. And then I went to the corner store and I bought a bunch more eggs. And I have gone back numerous times over the years, and I'll walk in and I'll buy like 6 dozen eggs at once. And then I, go find a ravine or a bush or, the backyard, whatever it is, and I will whip eggs because I want that physical release out of my body. So however the stuff is stored in your system, find a way of releasing it. Okay. James Pennebaker, he's done a lot of journaling exercises. If you journal every day for 1 week and release some of that, emotions, 6 months from now, you will be in a better place than if you hadn't done that 1 week of journaling today. So I love EFT, but it's not the only modality out there for releasing some of the stuff. Okay. As Dr. Lisa Rankin has said in her book, Mind Over Medicine, for those of you in CSL, you may be familiar with this book. It's part of the Revealing Wholeness course. As long as there's unhealed trauma in your body system, you will not completely cure from any chronic or life-threatening illness. So it will undermine things and will show up as cancer in your old age. It will show up as other arthritis issues as you get older. Any unresolved residue will showing up. Okay. And as Basil van der Kolk says, traumatized people chronically feel unsafe inside their bodies. And we've all had that moment where we see a particular vehicle, we see a particular dog because we were bitten by a dog as a child, whatever the case is, and we react, right? The body responds, right? The past is alive in a form that's gnawing at us inside of us. And because of the trauma we've dealt with in the past, and I've seen this with my friend. I'm in the car with my friend. I'm in the back seat. She's in the front. Her husband is driving, and he's pulling out, and she's reacting like, be careful, because she was in a car accident previously, and she's making sure her husband is seeing the truck, because she, I thought what he was doing was fine, but her body's responding because it's got the stored trauma inside of it. And so as a passenger driver, every time she's in the car, she's going to have this hypervigilant state of anxiety, right? So we end up living with this sort of constant background state of edginess when we've got this unresolved stuff going on in our bodies. So it's something to kind of be aware of. I'm going to flip through a couple slides quickly. So this is the ACE score related to job problems. So if you have an ACE score of 0, your likelihood of having a job issues, whether it's frequency of changing jobs or whatever the case may be, 8, 10%. But if you've got 4 or more ACEs, then you're twice as likely to have issues in the job, holding down a job, keeping a job, whatever the case may be. I had a client a number of years ago. He couldn't keep a job past 3 months. He'd be working and then he would end up, probation would be over and the job would be done. He didn't get past probation. And as we worked on some of his issues, we worked together for, a month or whatever the case may be. I forget exactly. This was, and then I crossed paths with him for a couple more sessions, like 3 years later. He's like, oh yeah, I've been working at such and such for a year and a half now. So he made it past that hurdle of that frequency of the job issues. Again, smoking issues, right? You're less likely to be smoking, right? And this goes with drug, alcohol, all the addiction things, if your ACE score is lower, because you're using the cigarettes to mask the emotional issues. I've seen it for myself. I'm out at some social event. I'm bored. I'm restless. I feel uncomfortable because I don't know anybody, and I'm at this networking thing, and I go to the food table and I start eating out of boredom. Right? I'm trying to pacify my emotions with food. And we do that with cigarettes, we do that with drugs, we do that, with lots of things. And again, the higher the ACE score, the more likely you're going to have depression or anxiety. And this shows up more so for women. Women are more vulnerable to mental health issues than men when it comes to depression. So things to be aware of. There are wounds that show up in the body that are deeper and more hurtful than anything that bleeds. This is the trauma that gets stuck in our system and shows up in our life experiences. It shows up in our bank accounts, right? If you've got an ACE score of 6 or 7, you can probably, homelessness is probably part of the thing. It's just because you've got these job issues, you've got these relationship challenges, etc. Any questions, comments? I've been telling you about why tapping's important. And then we'll get into we're going to get into some of the how-to resolutions. Great, glad this is fascinating, giving you some good background content. So pleased to see that, because a lot of the things we don't understand why. And often, like with doctors, we see our doctor for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we get a prescription, whatever it is, and we're gone again, and we don't always understand what's going on. And so it's important to understand how the body responds to these issues and the storage of the stresses. And we live in a world where we're so stressed that stress is the norm. And we often don't realize we're holding our breath till we stop holding our breath. It's a little bit like when the refrigerator stops or the air conditioner stops, like, oh, I didn't even notice it was making noise in the background. And then it's just gone. You're like, oh, it's like, right. And that's where you start to kind of like realize what you've been storing. Okay. So no, am I missing any hands? I don't see everybody on the hands up. Okay. One of the other things I want to kind of presence for you is, and this came from a book that I've got it years ago, from a medical doctor. And he talked about how the medical system can get you from sick to unsick, but it doesn't take you from unsick to well. So it's a matter of distinguishing that we want to shift from unsick to being well. And the way he described it is, if you are unsick and you go to the grocery store, you're going to come home with not just a bag of groceries, but also a virus. Whereas a person who is well, their immune system is strong enough that when they go to the grocery store, they're only getting groceries. So they're not picking up any additional viruses. So this is where, why is one person vulnerable to being sick and not the next person? So and sometimes if you look at people, you can tell they're pallor, the skin is off. You may have friends that are always fighting a cold or always fighting a headache, right? I remember being in a company once and I was in the waiting room and the receptionist was there and somebody came up from the back and went to the receptionist because she was the one who had the Tylenol. So if somebody had a headache, they went to the receptionist to get the painkillers, midway through the workday, right? So she was handing out the medication. So you want to be looking at whatever health issues you've got going on, not just getting to the stage of unsick where the symptoms are gone, but have you regained your vitality and your full energy? Here's a quick little thing behind addictions. I mentioned this with the food thing, right? So we've got maybe some false belief or some false premise, some idea in our head about how things are supposed to be. We could be holding some kind of tension, anxiety, stress. So the addiction becomes the pacifier. Right? I get stuck doing video games for hours, right? I sit there and I'm scrolling on social media and I'm bored. I'm like, and I'm watching one little clip on social media. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just lost the last hour and a half watching stupid stuff on YouTube, right? These little short clips, right? And I stop. It's like, okay, what's going on? And I know that emotionally I might be bored. I might be feeling disconnected from my friends. I'm looking for an emotional pacifier by getting into some of these addictive components. Now, is that going to be make or break my world? Not necessarily. But if I spend 30 minutes 3 times a day, that's an hour and a half and I'm not walking. It's an hour and a half. I'm not doing something more productive, like reading one of these 25 books I want to read. So the more we heal our emotions, the more we heal what's going on, the healthier we can be. Okay. One of the things to look at is our emotional scale. They come in different forms. The one on the left was where I was first introduced to this, which was Abraham Hicks and their book, Ask and It Is Given, I think is where it came from. So some of you are probably familiar with Abraham Hicks. The other emotional frequency scale, right? And so when we are carrying shame or guilt from somebody, on some issue in our life, and we've not forgiven ourselves about that issue, or someone else has not forgiven us, so we're still carrying this issue because they've not forgiven us, right? And we haven't been able to sit there and say, well, too bad. That's weighing us down. And we want to be able to release some of that guilt, right? I was listening to Margaret Lynch, and she's an EFT practitioner, and she was listening to a recording that she was doing, talking about debt. And she was talking about sometimes we may have solved the issue, but not released the shame. So if you've got a bankruptcy from 25 years ago that's still sort of sitting there in the back, if you've got a marriage breakdown from 25 years ago, if you've got something from something that happened 10, 20, 30 years ago, you might have fixed the issue. You might have money in your bank account now. You might be in a 20-year relationship now. But if you've still got some shame because you're in your second marriage, that shame is still there in the background and can be eating away at you in something because you're embarrassed to admit, oh yeah, I had this thing. Yeah, I filed bankruptcy once, or yeah, I smashed a car once, and my whatever it is. When you sit there and your insurance agent is going, so any history here, right? So just be aware of what are the emotions and how do we work way through. And sometimes, particularly for us as women, we're not allowed to be angry. And so we go internally to depression because we don't want to express our anger. And if we can't express our anger or let our anger out, and it's going internally into depression, we're actually at a lower vibrancy. So we want to be able to give ourselves permission to be angry, to maybe not act out that revenge, but to have those revengeful thoughts, because it's actually a sign of health when you've gone from depression and this guilt and this flatness to actually having some vibrance in your body, of having some anger, because it means you're feeling again. So know that as you work your way up, some of these emotions are a sign of progress and not a sign of limitations. Here's another scale, more complex, but again, the same premise of all these emotions that are coming up. Okay. We talked about SUDS. Okay. Some people will say to somebody, what number is that at? They're like, I have no idea. Don't talk to me in numbers. They're that the left brain, right brain thing, they're confused. So think about something that's stressing you. We talked about this at the beginning. And then I want you to look at, if that anger had a color, what color would it be? If it had a texture, is it coarse like sandpaper? Is it smooth like silk? Is it prickly like a porcupine or a cactus? Is there a sound? Does it sound like nails grating on a chalkboard? Does it sound like a rumbling truck or birds chirping? Like, think about, what does this feel like, taste like? Use your senses, because sometimes you can tune into where is that in your body. And sometimes if I go back to somebody afterwards and say, okay, has the color changed? And maybe it's gone from, dark blue to teal, or pale green like my sweater. I'm like, okay, there's movement. And then I'll check in, and like that red's gone down to a yellow. Okay. So I know that even if they don't have access to the numbering, I know that the energy behind that emotion is shifting because how they're describing it is different. It's no longer coarse like sandpaper. It's now smooth, like it's been sanded down. So I know that that anxiety is there. One of the other things to be aware with EFT is the body will respond as you're clearing through stuff. Yawning is a sign of release. Burping is a sign of release. You can feel the release in your body, right? If I'm working with a client and they're yawning, I consider it a compliment. For me, it's like, thank you. It's like, thank you. I know we're getting the work done. I know we're working through stuff. Sometimes I can hear it on the phone, right? Or if they've got their camera off for whatever reason, I can still hear the yawn in between as they're echoing me. So that's definitely there and is available. Okay. Any other questions? So I've kind of given the history of kind of what and how and where. Now we're going to do some tapping. Any questions before we get into the tapping? Thoughts, comments, anything you want to share, any experiences you've had, or questions like, oh, would this work? And you can put in the chat box if you want. Okay, loving the presentation. Excellent. Thank you. Getting a nod. Okay.
I
Use
have
the
a question, Kallista. Is it
yeah,
important when we're doing the tapping to be able to fully articulate what the root of our problem is, or will it be beneficial even if we're not sure?
great question. And no, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Start with whatever you're feeling. Okay. So if you've got a little bit of anger, right? Like, and you're like, I don't even know what I'm feeling. It's just start, right? Just these emotions, these feelings, And you can also kind of, I forget, I want to say shotgun, but I'm not, I don't know my thing. You can sort of tap on everything. Right. So for example, yesterday I was tapping, and we're like, this overwhelm, this anger, this upset, this annoyance. I'm upset. I'm irritated. I'm confused. I don't know what to do. So we're kind of rapid fire hitting all of the possible emotions. So sometimes, and this is where kind of like chasing the pain, I talked about that a little bit on a physical level. On an emotional level, same kind of thing. right? So, right, we'll start with the anger thing. I've got my computer still keeps wanting to slide. So we might start with this anger, all this anger. I'm really pissed off. I'm upset. I'm angry. I'm annoyed, right? And we can use it on a scale because I can be hesitant and I can be anxious and I can be scared and I can be afraid and I can be terrified. And it's a scale of fear, right? Or a scale of I'm a little bit miffed, I'm a little bit upset, as opposed to I'm downright, want to throttle somebody. So use whatever words you have access to in that moment. And in the unpacking of it, like unpacking an onion, you'll find the emotions shifting and changing. But that's a great question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Somebody mentioned they used it for a broken limb. It was a lifesaver. Yeah, the tap, so the pain went away. Did it for a relationship gone wrong. I would probably not be alive if I hadn't found EFT. And I'm being frank with this. My ACE score is in that 7 range, 6, 7 range, depending upon how you score it. So my ACE score is high, which means I've got high issues with career, high issues with vulnerability with addictions, high vulnerabilities with homelessness, right? And one of these things when you have childhood issues is that those family members that were toxic then have not learned how to not be toxic necessarily. So you don't have family as a support system. But it's kind of like it's helped me work through all of my depression, all of my anxiety, right? All of my insecurity issues. Because when you've got people telling you shouldn't be born, you're a mistake, that gets away into your system inside. So I would probably not be alive if I hadn't found tapping along the way. I credit my stuff to tapping, um, naturopathic nutritional stuff supports, right? So vitamin B and stuff, um, and and being disciplined about exercise, and then saying no and putting boundaries up with those toxic relationships. Um, in the chat, it says phobias and spiders keeps you calmer about a situation. Absolutely, it helps with those things. My brothers used to take snakes and dangle them in front of my face when I was a little girl. I had 4 brothers, and there's me, and then there's 4 of them. And so there was a 4-year gap between me and the youngest. So if I'm 4 years old, they're 8, 9, 12, 11, right? So they're right. We get 4 boys in a pack, right? So, right. But now the snakes don't bother me. If I'm hiking in the woods, I'm at peace with a snake. There was a day I was on the GO train, the commuter train, and it was a lunchtime thing. And I'm chatting with this gentleman across from me, and he's sitting there because women are afraid of bugs. And there was this large bug on my shoulder, but I couldn't see it because I'm looking at him. And he's watching it crawl down my arm. And he's sitting there going, if I say something, this woman's going to freak and she's going to jump. Right. And now this is like 10 years ago. So I've been doing 10 years of tapping. And when we do the training videos, we've got all the topics kind of covered. And all of a sudden, he's like, because he wants to warn me, right? And so he's trying to find a way. And and I'm like, oh, look. And we just watched it crawl. And he's like, you're calm. I'm like, yeah. Like there was no reaction. I didn't have to react. I was in Mexico for a while, and in Mexico they had large cockroaches, not the little things that we have here in Canada, but large cockroaches, right? Cucarachas. And I was staying in someone's house, and she was like, right? You'd see her reacting, right? And I'm like, oh, look, a cockroach, right? And I would just sweep it out the door. I'd just deal with it. So the emotional reaction was gone. And this allows you to, and it's a spider, it's whatever it is, right? A mouse. There was a dead mouse in my yard last week, right? You just pick it up and you just deal with it. You don't need that emotional charge to go with it. And that's the thing. Whatever we've got these emotional charges to, whether it's my friend with the driving, we want to be able to clear these emotional charges. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Let me get back to my video. So we're going to go back to the points. Okay, so again, the eyebrow, the side of the eye, the under the eye, the nose, the chin, collarbone, under the arm, or the fingertip points. Okay, I'm going to leave this up. Okay, and we've talked about all of the negative stuff we can do with tapping, but I want to take you through like a positive round. I want to kind of keep this down to like an hour and a half range. And then if people want to have questions, I'm happy to stay on longer. So tapping is useful for taking the negative. Here, let me stop sharing for a second. So when we have the negative, right, we've got that SUDS at an 8, 9, 10. A lot of times we use tapping to neutralize what's going on and bring us to a neutral position. But if you remember those emotional charts, we're still neutral. We're not in our happy place yet. So we can also use tapping for our affirmations and for the positive that we want to bring us to the happy tapping place. If I'm doing a round of tapping with somebody, I'll address the anger and the sadness or whatever it is, but also say, and I'm feeling good now. So in the statements, I'm expressing the negative as well as the positive so that I'm pushing people from the negative through to the positive. And we want to be aware of that, right? So we can use tapping for just imprinting what we want. So if you've got your affirmations that you're reading every day, just go along. I'm feeling good. I know I am prospering. I am thriving. You can read your affirmation sheet with your tapping. If you are doing any kind of prayer work, right? Right? Whether it's the traditional Our Father that we learned how to do, whether it is, thank you, spirits, for taking care of me, gratitude lists, whatever it is you want to do, you can add the tapping to it to allow it to go deeper into the system. Because when we are reading something, whether it's a prayer or affirmations, our mind is jumping to the butts. I call them the hitchhikers. So if I have my affirmation and I'm trying to launch my affirmation, there's this hitchhiker that sticks to it. So I am prosperous, but my bank account's empty right now. So I have this affirmation that I'm trying to shoot out into the world, but the reality of my life may not be echoing it. So the weight of the negative is weighing down my affirmation. So what happens is I have this tiny affirmation with this really heavy weight behind it of, oh, my bank account's not doing that. I don't have any clients booked. I got these bills coming due, right? So the weight of these hitchhikers takes the weight of the affirmation. So there's no juice in my affirmation, and that's why affirmations don't work. So this is where if I can keep my affirmation strong and get rid of those hitchhikers or those tail enders, I can do that. So when my mind is floating around when I'm doing affirmations, because it's going to be bouncing around, picking up some of these hitchhikers or tail enders, when I'm tapping my way through the affirmations, it helps to minimize these so that my affirmation or my prayer treatment or my gratitude list, if I'm rereading my gratitude list, comes out stronger. Okay. So that's one of the dynamics that you want to be aware of, which is why it's beneficial to do stuff. Okay. And let me get back into my share. Oops. Okay. So we're going to do what I call a happy tapping round. So we are going to be expressing the positive that we want as opposed to expressing the negative. Okay. So close your eyes for a moment, do a little check-in. Maybe you might want to note in your notation on your notepad to get a sense of where am I feeling right now. If I was to give myself a score of 0 to 100 or whatever score you want, how am I feeling right now? Is there any tension in the body? Am I at I'm a mediocre mood? If there was a color to describe how you're feeling or whatever it is, just kind of tune in if there's any tension in your body, anything that you're aware of. Okay. Make a note if you want of kind of, my mood's at a 3 right now or whatever. And tapping any spot you want. So if you want to stay on the karate chop point, you're welcome to stay at the karate chop point. If you want to move through the points, you're welcome to move through the points. I'm not going to have anybody echo me this time around. Often we have people echoing the other person, and I'm not going to do that. But that's something that's often done in tapping arounds, and you'll see that I've got like 150, 180, whatever videos on YouTube. You'll see that echoing dynamic if you come to my group sessions. But so just tap along. If you want to stay on one spot, you're welcome to stay at the one spot. So do whatever points that you feel comfortable with, whatever you want to access. It's all good. There's no wrong way. Left hand, right hand, doesn't matter. And you can switch halfway through. You can double it up. Okay. So it's all good. Okay. So taking a deep breath. I choose to be open to allowing more good in my life. I now know that my mind is ripe for the curative suggestion of having more good in my life. My mind is like freshly turned soil, ready for a cultivated seed, ready for germination and development. I know that I can ground myself in my heart space, the part of my body where my heart is, where my emotions live, and where my soul dominates. As I breathe in and as I breathe out, I know that I'm breathing through the heart. I'm breathing in love, breathing in more love than I've ever let in before. And as I breathe in love, I am letting out love. And this healing love is setting me free. This healing love that comes from the divine is setting me free. This healing love is swirling around my body, untying the knots that are there, erasing the dark spots, bringing every cell into perfect functioning. And as I breathe in love, I'm breathing in good thoughts and allowing good thoughts to dominate and fill my mind, knowing that from this point forward, all negative thoughts fall away like water off a duck's back. The negative thoughts disappear with ease because I now know that only good for me is coming to pass. I am healing my subconscious, releasing all past limitations, and my mind knows that I'm already whole. My heart knows that I'm already whole. There is prosperity within me, and life is supporting my highest good. I'm breathing in more love. And as I breathe in more love, I breathe in more compassion for myself, forgiving myself for every real or imagined slight, releasing all of the shame, releasing all of the guilt that I've been carrying. I know that the divine spirit sees me as whole. And the universal consciousness is giving me permission, the right, to let my mind accept new ideas, to recognize my wealth, my prosperity, allowing myself to have more power, allowing myself to have more freedom, more ease. As I stand in strength, feeling the love circling through me, emanating out from me, and returning to me, I know that I'm stronger, more whole, and blessed. For prosperity is my right. Freedom is my right. Joy and happiness is my right. I know that I am forgiven. I know that I am loved. I know that I am appreciated. I know that I'm valued. I know that I'm respected. I know that Mother Nature is good to me and wants me here. It's my time to be here in this world, to share my gifts, to speak my truth, to allow blessings to come about. The healing love is nourishing me, allowing me to blossom, allowing me to be whole. I know that this healing love is nourishing every cell, fiber, tissue, and organ of my body. And thus, my body is healing and every aspect is functioning properly. I sleep in peace. I awake calm, refreshed, invigorated, cheerful. I know that I can go about my day with a sense of confidence and ease, trusting the perfect unfoldment of my life, turning problems into solutions with ease. Cancellations become a gift in time. Detours become an opportunity to see a new path. I know that every word I speak that is good, that declares my desires, declares my needs, is heard by the divine and comes back to me in manifested form. I know that I deserve good. I hold compassion for others as others hold compassion for me. I hold gentleness for others as others are gentle with me. I trade in any limiting thoughts that I'd once had about myself or had about others, releasing all these limitations exchanging it for awareness, for love, for acceptance. Acceptance of myself and acceptance of others. And I have complete permission to speak my truth in the name of uplifting myself and uplifting others. I know that there's a benevolent, generous world out there, and a million people who want to do my bidding, to support me, to enhance me, to assist me in 1,000 ways. I know I can accomplish my desires right here, right now. There's a magical component to my world as things unfold with grace and ease. As I look around me, I intend to only see good. I intend to only hear good. And that is what I see. And that is what I hear. I expect to witness the good from the world, no matter who I am with, no matter where I am, or what I am doing. And I know that which I desire and what I intend to witness, along with the fulfillment of my dreams and goals, will manifest with ease. For every day, I'm at the right place at the right time and around the right people who help me to achieve my dreams and my destiny as they inspire me, uplift me, and help to bring out the best within me. I know that things are always falling into place for me. I trust that only good lies before me, that I am appropriately supplied with all of the resources I could possibly need at my disposal. Solutions present themselves with ease. There is harmony in all of my relationships because I connect with people who respect me and want the best for me. I know my projects unfold smoothly and quickly, as things have a knack of falling into place for me. And some people think I have the Midas touch. I am grateful for the blessings that abound. I appreciate the strength of the relationships around me and the harmony and joy that is in my life. Each day I feel invigorated, knowing that the Spirit lifts me up and provides for me in all ways. Because I trust that only good lies ahead, I relax. I live in peace and comfort, content, grateful that the strength of the divine is my strength. The power of Mother Nature is my power. For I am blessed. I am whole. I am complete, and I am well. And I surrender my dreams and desires to universal consciousness, knowing that it will bring only good to me and will exceed my desires and my imagination, blessing me in ways I couldn't anticipate. And I remain open and free to unexpected miracles, unexpected surprises, as I trust that there's good in each and every day. And I release these words to Spirit, and so it is. And any closing comments, any closing thoughts? I'm going to stop the recording so we can chit-chat about ourselves.
Fantastic, Kallista, fantastic. Thank you.